Finally, there's an exciting wind of change in my life. I'm going to finish university, find a job, buy more stuff that I don't need and don't deserve, and maybe I'll even take a few drum lessons. But the thing that made me the happiest person that I ever was in the last year is my guitar progress. For me personally, playing an electric guitar is this. And this. And this. You get the idea. I'm a fan of Paul Gilbert, and my main interest was the technical aspect of playing. I personally consider a proper right-hand alternate picking as the core technique of an electric guitar. Everything else for me is a bonus. Since I first heard Scarified, figuring out how to do that was basically my only goal. I never cared about performing, composing, or being a musician or playing with feel, and I still don't care. I just wanted to understand how a human can reach such a level to be able to play like that. After almost 8 years of trying to learn everything myself, I began searching for help. I knew I was going absolutely nowhere and I need to find a teacher. That was a problem, and because almost all players that call themselves guitar teachers, including many famous people on YouTube, simply suck. There is absolutely no way on earth they could play anything close to Paul Gilbert themselves. They can't even make a proper 6-string scale run without escaping to legato or playing very sloppy. It would obviously be a miracle if I could play anything with those teachers. The problem is that miracles tend not to happen. I subscribed to Paul Gilbert online school and tried it for a year. It was fun. I learned a few interesting things, but not what I went there for. Being a university student at the same time led me to the notion that there are 4 types of teachers, and the types are based on 2 important skills: the ability to play, here we said Paul Gilbert to be the golden standard, and the ability to teach. So those are teachers that can teach you to play at the same level as they play, no matter how they play. This is measured by results of their students. We can plot the guitar teachers types as a simple table and give some examples. So here is our table and we'll go over each quarter. In this quarter we have teachers that can't play and can't teach. Those are 95% of self-proclaimed guitar teachers and YouTubers. In this quarter, as you might have guessed, are teachers that can't play but can teach. These are people that think they are good enough to teach, but they're not. Yet at least you learn how to do what they do if that's something you're into. Now the 2 most important types. The first are teachers that can play but can't teach. Here are the absolute majority of guitar legends. One of them is Paul Gilbert. If you consider other fast and accurate techniques, here we can put Zakk Wylde, Yngwie Malmsteen, and the other real shredders. And finally, the cream of the crop, teachers that are amazing players, that understand their own technique, know how to explain it, create proper exercises, monitor their students, and are able to notice what fails them. Currently one of the few people on earth in this category, I believe, is Anton Oparin. Before we can talk about what has changed for me, I should explain my guitar path until today. I'll start with trying to play a small lick from Paul Gilbert's instructional video. Do you remember this one? Now that took a few attempts because I'm really nervous in front of the camera, but still, a year ago when I tried to play it, it was a disaster. I couldn't even pick the first 6 notes, like basic picking and crossing only 2 strings, and you can see it now. Obviously it's not as fast, but to me it starts to sound like it's supposed to sound. When I listen to Paul Gilbert, I imagine a locomotive. When he goes, he goes. There is no hesitation, everything is picked hard and consistent, he doesn't get stuck for a second or millisecond. You feel the momentum of his picking. Especially in his earlier playing on the Vernon Solos album, which I got 3 for some reason, he's a total beast. I took classical guitar lessons for 2 years, it's not in tune, since I was 14, which was 2004. Then I went to the army, during which my parents got me my first electric guitar. For my 20th birthday, I got a Gibson Les Paul Studio. Nothing is in tune in this house. So yeah, it was 2010, I chose Gibson Les Paul, which was a mistake, and soon I'll explain why. In 2018, whatever you like, 8 years later, overall I had 0 progress. I always knew that my right hand was the problem, because I always had to think about it, so it left me no brain cells for the left hand. It took me several hours of warm-up to start feeling comfortable with picking. It was ridiculous, there was obviously something wrong, but I couldn't find answers anywhere. The only sort of tutorial was how to speed pick Paul Gilbert style by Remy Hansen.
It's all in the wrist.
But it is not enough for the majority of people, just like Paul Gilbert instructional videos. If you're watching this video, you probably noticed that there are a handful of people that play anywhere close to Paul Gilbert, like Remy and like the Magic Kid from 2009 video, Anton Oparin. Quite a surprise when Anton started a YouTube channel, and shortly after that he started his online guitar school. His current guitar level is just insane. I think he's the best technical player that I have ever seen, and he plays stuff that maybe even Paul Gilbert might struggle with. And the reason is that Anton understands his own technique. So when he needs to play something complicated, he knows exactly how to accomplish it. In my opinion, currently Anton Oparin is the only guitar virtuoso in the world that knows what he's doing, why he does what he does, and knows how to teach it. If you watch Paul Gilbert or Zakk Wylde instructional videos and tutorials carefully, you'll notice that when they demonstrate something slowly, their technique is nothing like when they actually play up to speed. And that's the first critical difference between Anton and other teachers. His lessons and slow demonstrations are exactly the same as when he plays up to speed. The key component that allows him to do it is the 3-finger unit, which he talks about in every interview. After I moved to his way of picking, I believe it is the only reasonable way to force the pick through the string without hurting yourself, even at slow speeds, while the pick is located pretty deep for dynamics. The general idea is that we want to pick in straight lines, and not intuitive jumping or hopping when our pick hits the obstacle. In fact, it is something that Paul Gilbert himself does quite often. In fact, Paul strums chords even with 3 fingers, which is very useful, so the 3 fingers are mwah. When he plays slower and deeper, he uses the same 3-finger way of holding the pick. So what Anton did is he made it a habit. As it turned out, a very useful habit, because it makes your life easier, especially as a student, to develop the wrist picking in straight lines concept. So some lucky people around the world figured out how to play like Yngwie, like Paul, yet for absolute majority of players it is still a mystery, like myself. I believe this is how Troy Grady channel was born, where he breaks down videos and tries to figure out what is going on, but I felt he was still missing some key components and how to bring them all together, or how to practice stuff. Maybe he has some paid content where he explains everything, but I haven't seen any results like people on YouTube, reviews. Now we're getting to the essence of this video. When Anton Oparin started his online guitar school, the first thing that has drawn my attention is the short videos popping here and there of his students' results. I was simply blown away by just their alternate picking on a single string and the string crossing. They were perfect. This is the opposite of what I saw in Paul Gilbert online school, where I haven't seen even a single student that you could say that the lessons are the ones responsible for their progress. It was a normal distribution of mediocre players with 2-3 exceptions maybe. If I remember correctly, there were 3 units, levels of lessons. In each unit you had to submit a few video exchanges. You didn't have to, but you could. You could see how there were 800 submissions for the first lesson, strumming a chord. Then like 400 submissions for pentatonic chicas. Then the next submission like 200. Basically you could see people simply giving up and going nowhere. Sadly, this is a typical drop in students' interest when they don't feel any progress. I really tried, look. Every single lesson until, I don't know, the last unit. I think I gave up in the last unit. I practiced every day for a few hours with almost no results. Eventually I did learn a few important things that helped me later, like the principles of muting. Now I know that Paul Gilbert always mutes the top string of what he doesn't play with his finger. Yeah, so if we play like the third string, the fourth one, he's muting with the tips of his fingers. That's the basis of the pentatonic chicas. And the pentatonic chicas are awesome, so it was worth the money eventually, because with the look, we can make it twangy if we roll down the volume. Essentially you can write a lot of stock music and intros and cool easy melodies with just pentatonic chicas. But I went there specifically to figure out what's wrong with my right hand and got zero information. So before I gave up again on my dream to play like Paul Gilbert, after so many years of owning a Gibson Les Paul Studio, I decided to give it one last try, last chance with Anton. I took a break from guitar for 2 weeks, went to a music store, got myself an Ibanez RG as he advised, and watched the first lesson. Now I know that I'll never go back to whatever I was trying to do in the past 8-9 years. What is so special about Anton lessons is that he builds your technique from tens or even hundreds of little specific details that until now I haven't seen no one even talk about. Looking back to when I started, every single one of them is essential for the final result, which is playing precisely, consistently, dynamically, or with dynamics, effortlessly, without being afraid of hitting or not hitting strings that you want or don't want to play. Just like Anton, Paul Gilbert, and the best of the best players. As I said, for me it was important to figure out what's wrong with my right hand. As it turned out, everything was wrong with my right hand. I've changed literally everything in my playing, and here are just some of the details. First, I changed how I hold the guitar. My sitting position that was destroyed by the heavy, unbalanced and uncomfortable Gibson Les Paul. I was sitting like that because I was afraid to put my hand on the guitar. It was hurting my hand, and once something is not comfortable for you, you tend to lift your hand so it doesn't hurt your hand, and it absolutely destroys your precision of the picking hand. That enabled me to change my points of contact with the guitar. Now I could rest my hand nicely so my guitar doesn't fall back, and it's closer to me because the Gibson tends to fall forward also, so I was sitting like PewDiePie most of the time, so guitar falls to me. Now my weight distribution of the right hand was much more comfortable, and more precise. I learned where to put each part of the hand correctly so we can achieve precision. Because your points of contact with the guitar, with the wrist and the forearm, are the reference points, and those reference points are very important for you to feel where the pick is relative to the strings. Now, some people think they can do it like very easy for them. When they try to play with their fingers, maybe with 2 fingers or from the hand. They think that tremolo is a technique that you just need to play as fast as possible, but actually tremolo, where some of the tremolos, you know, sometimes it's just as an effect, but if you just want to play fast and incorporate other stuff, you need to play with control. So playing fast with no technique won't allow you to use other stuff except for tremolo. Now we'll talk about controlling the picking. I changed everything in my picking. The motions are now done from the wrist. And it was really weird at first. It felt like holding a pick on a stick. You felt no control. And part of it was that you had to use the reference points and your contact points to stabilize your hand. So they become the reference points. Because intuitively you want to feel where the pick is. So you tend to use your fingers instead of your wrist. So you need to force yourself to use the wrist, yet you have to nail the contact points so they become the reference points and you don't miss the strings. Essentially, as I understand it, we need to do the opposite of what our body tells us to do. So I guess it was natural for some people to play in straight lines from the start because they use the wrist from the start. But for most people, it was much more intuitive to play with strings hops instead of this. Because when you hit an obstacle, the first thing you want to do is just avoid it. If you get stuck, and you get stuck if you play with 2 fingers usually, and you don't hold the pick strong enough. And about holding the pick, oh, the microphone. How I hold the pick, I also changed it. Everything. How it's aligned, what part of the thumb holds it, how strong I hold it. Before I was using the pick just like with 2 fingers, with the thumb usually covering all the pick, and the pressure was coming more on the finger itself. Now my the fret was rotated like with not 90 degrees towards the thumb, but like more weird, so my upstrokes were a bit easier to do, but that changed the tone of the upstroke, so my down and upstrokes weren't even in their tone. And now using Anton's 3-finger signature grip, I'm holding like 2 fingers, putting my thumb on the knuckles mainly. I mean, the pressure is more on the knuckles and not on the fingers, because if you had like 2 fingers holding the pick, your little part here bends even if you don't support it with another finger, and it's easier to put pressure on the bones rather than on the finger tips. So basically my thumb went from this to this, like a small offset to the right, my right. And the pick now is exactly 90 degrees to the thumb, not rotated, not that angle, not that angle, 90 degrees, and the thumb is not covering the whole pick. Actually, I'm using a medium pick size, like in size, I mean this size. Thickness is, I don't know, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, no, 6 is too low, 0.8. Why I mean too low? Because we want to learn how to pass the strings. And if we use a very thin pick, like Paul Gilbert is using 0.5, the pick bends, and you don't practice to hold the pick strong enough. You can pass every string, the thicker strings like the 4th, the 5th, and the sixth are harder to pass, so we practice on the third string first. Because the fourth string, to pass it with dynamics, I mean to practice it playing deeper, is much harder for a beginner. First you need to practice the concept, then you can upscale it to the upper strings. So you can keep picking straight lines even on thicker strings. Now believe me, it's much harder if you don't practice it first on the third string. You simply won't understand what you need to do if you don't practice on the third string first, then try it on the fourth. You'll simply break your technique. During the first lesson you also learn how to mute properly with the right hand and keeping the same straight line picking without turning your hand to do it, because that will basically ruin your straight line picking. You will pick outside the guitar or inside or outside, like you'll do very weird things if you try to mute with rotating the forearm. The basic concept of his technique, and he talks about it in his first lesson, that every muscle has only one job to do, so it can do it properly and simple enough for the brain to remember. Because, for example, if you want the wrist to pick notes and do the string transitions at the same time, the only way you can cross strings is hopping and losing precision and speed. So you start lifting your wrist, and there goes your speed. That's it. That's where you lose it all. And precision. So how do you transition strings? Well, that's one of his things he doesn't tell in his interviews, and is one of his signature techniques. So currently I can't talk about it too much. The only thing I can say is that it's not the job of your fingers or your wrist. There's another part of your right hand that is responsible for it, and you need to know how and what to practice to train it. And only if you mastered the first lesson, and Anton approved it because he can notice when people try to fake something, and he simply sees everything, and you will simply won't get the results that you need. You can lie to yourself as much as you want, like keep playing for years, thinking that here now I'm getting better, and the 10,000 hour rule, I'm getting better if I play more. No, that's a complete bullshit. I proved it for myself. You need to know what to practice, how to practice, and it's much faster to use help, and the proper help. After a few months that I fought myself, fought my bad habits, got few feedbacks from Anton to lift my wrist. Before I was holding it like here, but it was hard to play on the upper string because we had like weird angle here. The hand can bend lower much better than up. So I lifted my wrist. I had to hold my pick stronger. He noticed that I have micro, while I'm playing from the wrist, I had the micro movements in my fingers. That's like my bad habits. So I had to eliminate those habits, and I noticed that my old habits come through if I'm not sitting correctly. If my hand doesn't rest comfortably on the guitar, I tend to lift it. I won't even notice it. It has still contact with the guitar, but I'm actually holding it more from the shoulder, so my shoulder goes up. I go this way, and the hand, the wrist actually simply loses the contact points, and everything breaks down. So you need to relax and monitor every single aspect and the detail that you learned. But because there are a lot of details, sometimes you forget about the others, and those are the ones that failing you. That you're moving the wrist, but then you do small movements with the fingers, and everything goes back to your bad habits, and your hand already is up, and tension. I'll try to forget the past 8 years, except for the university, because I need the job and the money. Every day of your practice is going to be a war with yourself, with your mind mostly, like a mental pain. But then, after a few months, the magic started happening. The motions started feeling natural, the string hops started disappearing. Then all of a sudden, I was feeling really comfortable with the guitar. I didn't need warm-ups as I needed 3 hours in the past. Suddenly I could play with dynamics without even practicing. Like some people say you need to practice like really small motions, just touch the string. Actually, that's much harder because you don't really know how far you need to play, and Anton tells you how far you need to pick. And if you want to play with dynamics, you need to push the pick deeper. That's exactly how Paul Gilbert does his dynamics, and he talks about it. And you can't achieve this thing if you practice with shallow picking, and your hand will actually get tensed and you'll come back to everything you didn't want because you get tense. I tried to practice this once a long time ago, and my hand was just shaking because I was afraid like not to pick too hard, because then I get stuck and you don't know how to handle it. And that's like the part of the 3-finger unit. That's what eliminates it. The weight of your wrist, that's what passes the string, not the fingers. They can't do it. They are too weak. So controlling the picking depth and the picking trajectory path, you know how wide it is, it came like a bonus, and everything sounds much more consistent when you play from your wrist. So to sum up my experience with Anton Oparin lessons until now, they are overwhelming. Beside the huge amount of useful information and support that you get from Anton and other students, if you're ready to start learning from scratch and implement every single detail Anton tells you to do, you'll get results, and those results will push your motivation even further. My advice for you is to take the time, don't rush it with the first lesson, get a proper guitar, and the first lesson is the most important one, and after it the strings crossing. If you're feeling something is wrong as you practice, ask questions, send videos, because your body is telling you you're doing something wrong, and Anton notices stuff that most teachers don't even know about. You can do exactly what I did. I got this Ibanez RG. It's quite expensive, but even the cheaper models don't have any spikes or weird bridge things, so your hand can rest nicely. Get an Ibanez RG because there are cutaways that will make your practicing and long practices much more pleasant, and obviously the balance of the guitar will be correct and you can put your hand nicely, not like a Gibson or other Telecaster, you know, things that don't have the cutaways. Don't give up, keep asking questions. If Paul Gilbert's style of picking from the wrist is your thing and that style of playing, and you are ready to start like learn everything from scratch again, give it time and actually listen to what people tell you to do. Go for it. It's not gonna be easy, mostly mentally. At first you might, your thumb might hurt with the fingers a bit, but you get used to it and don't feel it after a few weeks if you do it properly and get the main ideas. Like that when you need to pick harder and deeper, you need to hold the pick stronger. If you go lighter, you can hold it lighter. A lot of small details. Watch the first lesson for a few times before you attempt doing anything, practicing anything. Beside the official lessons, use other material, watch other Anton's replies to other students, because most of us have the same problems, the same obstacles, and you just need to figure out which of them are in your case. I wish you good luck, and I need to practice my second lesson submission of string crossing. It's about time.